Is about the Twilight Zone. Anyone listening to yesterdayyusa.com, and for the audience here in the crowd, if you go to yesterdayyusa.com and you can click a button, you can actually listen to whatever radio program is being broadcast. The Old Time Radio Club has a program, Terry Solmonson has a program, Neil Ellis has one. You can listen to old time radio shows for free. It's live on the internet. And even Carl Amari, formerly of Radio Spirits, now of Falcon Picture Group, presently does the Twilight Zone radio dramas, where he takes the scripts from back in the 1950s and 60s, the TV scripts, and has them adapted into the radio scripts, so that they are actually, the radio audience can enjoy them. Similar to what Cecil B. DeMille said that he liked about Lux Radio Theater, it gives the people the opportunity who are blind, who cannot actually see the good performances, to at least hear them in some aspect. This presentation is about the Twilight Zone. It is one of my favorite radio TV programs. And a little background, which I know is the most boring part of any presentation, is that when I was 12 years old, the Philadelphia radio TV station, which was channeled as PBS, actually featured late night around 10 or 11 o'clock at night, the Twilight Zone, 5 times a week. And I got hooked on it by the 3rd episode. Everyone's familiar with the episode with Burgess Meredith as Henry Bemis. He was a bookworm, loved to read, and one day he goes into a bank vault, and locked and sealed, the bomb is dropped, and he finds himself the last living man on Earth. And the horrible twist at the end of the story is when he realizes he really doesn't want to be alone and contemplates suicide, he finds a library. And as a bookworm, he absolutely thinks he's in heaven, until he drops his glasses and is completely blind. From that point on, I was hooked on the show, and I've always collected Serling memorabilia, scripts, letters, correspondence, went through archives, relished every bit of morsel of it. And over the years, I bought every book on Twilight Zone, script book, essays, any magazine that had an article. And there still is today quite a number of them coming out. And all of them offer a little something that comes into play that helps promote the Twilight Zone and also reveal some more facts and history. But I kind of got the idea, nobody really needs to go out and buy 150 magazines and 17 published books. All the information that's required should go into one book. And as I'm holding here for the audience, I did a book which just recently got published. It's called The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic. And it's 812 pages thick, very heavy. It was shipped directly to the printers or publishers this morning, and they were gone by afternoon. That's how close and soon it just came out. So anyone on the radio audience listening, you can go to Amazon.com. Everybody here, there's flyers on the flyer table. I'm going to use a lot of the material from this book that I did research, and much of the information I'm going to reveal here in the presentation you will not find in other published reference guides. It's original research. Typical stuff such as inter-office memos give you what's going on behind the scenes, that kind of tidbits and trivia. Twilight Zone, for the benefit of those who have not heard seen the series or are somewhat familiar, was created by a man named Rod Serling. He enjoyed doing a lot of reading a lot about science fiction and fantasy, and he wrote the first 2 scripts for Playhouse 90. The second was called Requiem for a Heavyweight, and it stole the Emmys that year. And CBS said, we have something that just put the station on the map. In fact, William Paley gave a personal phone call down to the studio after seeing that, and he knew immediately we were going to win some Emmys. From that point on, Playhouse 90 became a Rod Serling program. And every year, when they renewed contracts, he was required to write a minimum number of scripts for the Playhouse 90. In 1958, he wanted to do a fantasy series, which was a cross between horror and science fiction. He never wanted to classify the series as science fiction. It had to be fantasy. And the funny part is when he proposed it to CBS, they said no. They did not understand what fantasy is. And when you look at the programs of the times, there was very little fantasy. So eventually he negotiated and said, all right, if you want me to I won't sign the next renewal contract for Playhouse 90, I get my own show. They negotiated. He created a production company called Joe Nan Productions, and it stood for his 2 daughters, Jody and Ann. Nan was the nickname. It somewhat flopped at first, CBS, and he had to close that down. He opened a second production company called Pacific Palisades. Again, only on paper. It was a production company. It never got a chance to do a pilot. Finally, a pilot was produced for the Desilu Playhouse called The Time Element. The story concerns William Bendix, who goes back in time and finds himself in Pearl Harbor the day before the bombing. And he's trying to warn everybody that the place is going to be bombed by the Japanese. And naturally, everybody thinks he's a lunatic. He's almost about to be committed. And it's a recurring nightmare. He's telling the psychiatrist, and says, I think I'm going back in time. And at the very end, he disappears, and the psychiatrist doubts his sanity. The story, CBS took one look and went, oh, no, 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 no. And executive producer Bill Self said, no, you air this. You owe this to Serling. In fact, he risked his job because CBS said, if this flops or we have issues, you're out of a job. The very next week, they had the largest response in the entire last 2 years from that broadcast, and it was very favorable. And that served as the pilot for the Twilight Zone. From that point on, Rod Serling produced his own series under Cayuga Productions, and for 5 years, the Twilight Zone took everybody into a borderland of imagination. What I'm about to play for you is very rare. Westbrook Van Voorhees, who did the March of Time newsreels, was hired at first to do the narration for the Twilight Zone instead of Rod Serling. They did a different kind of opening with the stars gazing, and Serling watched it and said, it's kind of science fiction-y. Can't we change that a little more fantasy, mystical, maybe some mountains, some dark caves and shadows? And they did switch over it, and then they actually recorded Rod Serling to do the narration. What I'm about to play for you, and I'm hoping the radio audience will be able to hear at least the soundtrack, is the original intended opener that never has been seen or broadcast on the series.
There is a sixth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. It is the middle ground between light and shadow, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the sunlight of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area that might be called the Twilight Zone.
I want to do that screen capture right there. You notice how it's more 50s science fiction-ish? That's something that Serling said, no, 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 which is why the first season has more mountains, more landscapes, shadows. He wanted to, another difference between this and what you see on TV is that they actually call it the fifth dimension. On this, they call it the sixth. They actually changed that very shortly when someone told Serling, there's a sixth dimension? And they took a look and said, all right, fine, fifth. That is the opener that never got used. It was shown and used on what's called the pilot that Where Is Everybody, which had Earl Holliman guest star in it. He had done a Playhouse 90 called The Dark Side of the Moon. Serling loved his performance and said, I want to use him. I want him to be in my pilot. They filmed the pilot. They pitched it to a bunch of sponsors. That CBS said, as long as you get the sponsor, that's the contract. They put it on a very bad time slot. It went on 10, depending what time of the part of the country, 10 or 10:30 at night on Friday. That was considered a very dead air. The series did, however, boost a little ratings. Compared to today, where it's a cult phenomenon and everyone looks back and says, oh, Twilight's been one of the 100 greatest shows ever done easily on TV. Back then, the ratings were not impressive. And it wasn't until February, just a few months after the premiere, that its rival competing show, The Detectives with Robert Taylor, by February, their ratings were higher than The Detectives, and almost by 20 points. It was a considerable gap, and the CBS realized they had something. But the show still stayed on for the first 3 seasons on Friday night, and that's not a good time slot. But the fan mail came in, and Serling was happy. He had the program he did. And each year, especially for the second year, what they did is they gave him another contract for a renewal, and once again, they put in the contract, you have to at least write 2 scripts for Playhouse 90. And he said, okay, fine. So the only reason the show really kept going, in my opinion, is because CBS wanted him to continue writing for Playhouse 90.